This video is sponsored by Surfshark VPN. Use the link in the description for 83% off and 3 months for free. Laid on her bed horizontally, her chin propped up on one of her pillows, Rebecca watched her fish swim around its tank, moving from the right side to the left side, pausing there for a moment, then from the left to the right, pausing there for a moment, and then back, over and over, as it usually did. While watching her fish, whom she had named Shiny, Rebecca talked about her day and whatever else was on her mind, as she usually did. Rebecca was a very intelligent young child, and perhaps somewhat related to this, she was also quite a lonely, isolated child. She had bad social anxiety as a consequence of her genetics, her tendency to overthink, and a set of parents who also suffered from various social anxieties, surrounding Rebecca with a constant unsettling tension during her formative years. As a result, Rebecca often had a difficult time communicating, especially with kids her own age, and struggled to make many friends during this early part of her life. In a sort of way, at this time, her best friend was her fish. Some of the greatest conversations she ever had were with Shiny. She would tell it everything, unhindered and unencumbered. She would complain to Shiny about her parents and teachers. She would tell it what she was sad about when she was sad, what she was happy about when she was happy, what she wanted to do and who she wanted to be when she was older, and so on. All the while, Shiny swam its few routes back and forth, every once in a while, stopping and staring with its naive, unaware eyes back in her direction. Still at an inevitably naive age, Rebecca felt the inclination to believe that in these moments, Shiny sort of understood and personally loved her like a friend. Although it's possible that Shiny did, at some point, start to recognize the recurring patterns of Rebecca's facial arrangement and associate her likeness with food, it of course did not actually like nor know Rebecca in any real sense of these terms at all. It was a fish. It hadn't the slightest clue as to how to form the slightest clue of what, or in this case who, Rebecca was. Its mental framework far too small, its perceptual and cognitive capacity essentially null. Shiny would go on to live 15 healthy years, aging with Rebecca through her adolescence. Sort of out of habit, Rebecca continued to talk with Shiny throughout the rest of its life. Of course, Rebecca would soon realize how foolish it was to be talking with her fish, understanding that Shiny almost certainly did not get her or like her on any level at all, but nonetheless, she still enjoyed the routine. Now though, on the occasions when Shiny's eyes looked back at her, Rebecca found herself wondering instead that if not really her, what exactly was Shiny experiencing? Could it recognize her in any form at all? Could it understand her at all? Did it really process anything as the reality that was actually happening? Rebecca reflected on the fact that Shiny obviously knew she was some sort of something that was happening around or to it whenever she did something like feed it or put her hand into the tank and so forth. But yet, at the same time, since Shiny did not and could not know what that something actually was and why it was doing what it was doing, Rebecca's image and touch and vocal vibrations were things happening to it with no conscious source. There was no way for it to understand that Rebecca was a living human being that loved it, that cared for it, that those sound waves she emitted had meaning contained inside them, that there even were sound waves at all, that there was specific, thoughtful, conscious intention in the movements around and towards it. Although Shiny could never know, it had a huge impact on Rebecca's life, their sort of relationship greatly influencing her as she asked these sorts of questions, learning more about herself and her interests of the world. Between the bond she formed with Shiny, her social anxiety, and her hard time communicating, over the course of her early teens, Rebecca became deeply interested in the ways in which species develop and carry out language, delving further into this research field known as linguistics. In high school, Rebecca created and ran her school's first linguistics club, took multiple summer linguistic courses hosted by local universities, and explored deeper and deeper into her own research. In college, she worked for several linguistic and cognitive science research groups, was an assistant for the school's leading anthropological linguistics professor, and already began concluding her senior thesis by this time, garnering serious interest and respect from this professor as well as other faculty. By age 22, Rebecca received her PhD, and by her early 30s, she had become a leading linguist, teaching as a professor at UC Berkeley, writing several majorly successful books, winning numerous awards, and becoming internationally recognized for her work in language acquisition and psycholinguistics. At age 45, however, in her species year of 1977, Rebecca's career would dramatically shift, inverting her in a totally different direction. Earlier the same year, a strange radio signal was intercepted by a telescope that was used as part of a university program that scanned deep space, searching for signs of extraterrestrial intelligent life. This was the first time in human history that an observed space signal showed sufficient power, suitably narrow bandwidth, and a range of small radio frequencies that added up to indicate an artificial nature to the signal. Upon examination, it was believed to be a highly likely candidate for extraterrestrial life. As a result of this groundbreaking moment, efforts to decipher and analyze the signal, develop the search for subsequent signals, and transmit corresponding signals back into space all increased. As a part of this growing initiative, Rebecca was sought out and recruited by an organization known as the International Contact Group for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, the hope being to utilize her leading knowledge of language acquisition and language types for the purposes of both interpreting and broadcasting messages to and from alternate types of beings. Rebecca couldn't turn down such an unusual and interesting opportunity, and so, after a little negotiating, she took the job. Years and years would go by. Rebecca would become a key member of the organization, leading a specific team that worked on developing and broadcasting various sorts of signals into deep space. Signals that could theoretically be picked up by another species within 100+ million light years away. Additionally, they developed and sent out space probes housing various plaques, audio and video recordings, music, mathematics, and other forms of information and communication. Despite these great efforts, though, no explanation would ever conclusively be found for the initial signal, and no more of its kind would ever seem to reappear. Throughout this later portion of her career, Rebecca couldn't help but wonder more and more where everybody was. In a potentially endless space, with billions and billions of years behind humanity, how is there no one else out there? Almost every night, Rebecca spent some time on her porch looking up into the stars, entirely perplexed by the strange paradox that her work seemed to illuminate and reinforce. That somehow it is likely that at least several hundred million, if not several billion Earth-sized planets were out there with inhabitable conditions for life in just the Milky Way galaxy alone, and potentially trillions of habitable planets in the universe at large. And if human development and technology were to be extrapolated to any reasonable degree in relation to the size and age of the universe, even if just a small percentage of these planets had formed life, the galaxy should be rife with signs of it by now. But yet, the universe appeared dead and quiet, humanity alone, the great silence. Right now, Rebecca continues on, moving around her planet, mostly back and forth between two sections, work and home, pausing and hovering in one for a little, then to the other, hovering there for a little, and then back again, over and over, as she usually does. Right now, as it usually does, a being from the species known as what loosely translates into, named what loosely translates into, or just 011L for short, hovers outside or sort of in between time and space, watching Rebecca, talking to her about whatever is on its mind. 011L is a member of a superintelligent species who, a long time ago, evolved from one of the earliest lineages of life that formed and survived the early budding universe. As it successfully evolved through time, it developed intelligence, built technology, extended out past its host planet, harnessed the power of its host star, eventually breaching the bonds of biological and neurobiological conditions, building and collectivizing with other galactic life forms, and finally, harnessing the total energy of its host galaxy. Over time, the superintelligent species had gotten smaller and smaller, moving further up the interdimensional rungs of physical reality, until it became what would appear immaterial to all beings of other dimensional levels. Now, the species traverses the universe, exploring and perceiving things outside and in between time, not confined to it, nor the same physical material and conditions that confine 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9-dimensional space. Rebecca's reality is accessible to 011L in a way that might be sort of similar to the way in which Rebecca accesses information from an external computer hard drive, displaying the stored information bits onto a separate monitor screen. Accessible to species with the technology to locate, extract, and read it, her reality's information is contained in bits of information stored on the outer edge of the universe's geometric surface, which can then be observed through a sort of hologram-like projection. Although this is metaphorically sound, in truth, trying to accurately explain and understand such a phenomenon with these words through such a human mode of thinking would sort of be like Rebecca trying to explain physics to her fish. Specifically, 011L is an especially intelligent superintelligent being. Perhaps somewhat related to this, it is also a particularly lonely and isolated superintelligent being. It has a bad form of what could sort of be the equivalent to social anxiety as a consequence of its tendency to overthink and some portion of its maladaptive input codes. Consequently, it often has a difficult time communicating with others, especially its own kind. It has and continues to struggle to make many friends, and in a sort of way, at this time, Rebecca is its best friend. Some of the greatest conversations it has ever had were with Rebecca. It tells her everything, unhindered and unencumbered. It complains to her. It tells her about its life, about what it's like to be alone and to exist in the condition that it does, what its favorite and least favorite things are, its favorite places in the universe, and so on. Early on, when 011L, by chance, picked out Rebecca, not too dissimilar from the way in which Rebecca picked out Shiny, it initially thought that she sort of understood and loved it like a friend. That when she stopped and looked up into the stars, with her naive, unaware eyes pointed in its direction, she knew 011L. But of course, it didn't take long for 011L to realize that there was no way for Rebecca to understand and know of it at all. She was a human. She hadn't the slightest clue as to how to form the slightest clue of what, or in this case who, 011L was. She couldn't know that it loved her, that it cared for her, that the interdimensional frequencies it emitted had meaning contained inside them, that there even were any frequencies at all, that there could be intention in the universe's motion around her. Rebecca could visually see and feel the oscillations of motion and physical material that were the consequences of 011L's thoughts and actions, manifesting at the quantum level in what appeared to be random particle behavior. But she could not know nor attribute any thoughts or concepts to this. To Rebecca and the rest of humanity, there was no real source. Her mental framework far too small, her perceptual and cognitive capacity essentially null in comparison. Ironically, 011L and the rest of its species never knew that Rebecca and her human colleagues had been trying to contact them or anyone. The physical objects sent out looked like meaningless debris, and the radio signals, on the few occasions that they actually reached them, appeared to be but a primitive foreign noise that translated into nothing for them. At times, some did consider the possibility that the radio broadcasts were some form of an effort to communicate with them. But just like how Rebecca did not seriously bark back at a dog when it was barking at her to communicate, this species never thought to, nor knew how to properly bark back. Except for the one time, in 1977, when they tried in a kind of humorous, playful effort, which ultimately served no purpose. In truth, there was in fact a galaxy rife with technology and signs of other life. Rebecca and the rest of her species were right in this conclusion, but wrong when they assumed that they would recognize it. And so, continuing to this day, they still think they're alone. Like most species like them, they don't see anything, and so they assume nothing is there. But just like Rebecca was right there in the room with Shiny, but Shiny had no way of knowing that the physical shape of her was an intelligent being named Rebecca. Right there in the room with Rebecca was 011L, but Rebecca had no way of knowing that the emergent physical phenomena of it was a superintelligent being named 011L. This video was sponsored by Surfshark VPN. With various potential threats to your data and information lurking on the internet, staying safe and secure on your devices is of course a very important practice. Surfshark is a VPN service that makes this fast, easy, and affordable. By hiding your IP address, encrypting your data, and scanning for email compromises, Surfshark guards and conceals your identity, location, passwords, photos, and other personal information from any sort of online risk. In addition to protecting your data and personal information, Surfshark also provides a ton of great practical features to further increase your overall web browsing experience in general. For example, by letting you change your device's location, Surfshark allows you to bypass various country restrictions and censorships, and thus access any and all internet content, no matter where you're physically at in the world. Additionally, it also allows you to access different offerings and formats from website platforms that can vary based on user geography, like, for example, the 15 different libraries of Netflix, or the lower prices for things like airfare, car rentals, and other e-commerce products that can often be affected and targeted differently in different countries. With just one subscription, Surfshark can be used on as many devices as you'd like at the same time, meaning all your personal devices as well as your friends and families. If you're interested, you can get Surfshark VPN for 83% off the regular price, plus 3 months for free by clicking the link in the description below or by going to surfshark.deals/POW and using the promo code POW. And of course, thank you so much for watching in general, and see you next video.